All right. So, you have the whole book.
Well, I had to because I couldn't find.
Good for you.
And I couldn't get it on Kindle.
Yeah.
You can get printed off of the internet.
It's amazing to me that you could really, you can get out of I mean, it's a massive. I've never read the entire thing, I have to admit.
The whole chapter.
God bless.
About
Yeah.
70
You have to be 20 years old.
I'll tell you. I'll tell you. So I one of the reasons I wanted to look at this, I figured we should do a shorter one since the last one was a long one. Well, I guess let's open it up. What were your initial impressions reading it? Have you felt that it was relevant to anything that
Yeah.
your experience? Yeah.
Today is ISIS.
ISIS. Interesting. How so?
Well, I think the way that the Grand Inquisitor, what he wanted to do, what the Catholicism wanted to do then, is what ISIS is trying to do now.
Do you think it's the same?
Not the same, but it has.
They're using religion in order to be able to subjugate. But you listen to the she just said the premise of it is brilliant. I thought Jesus comes back to the Inquisition and they arrest him. I just thought, how many times have we said if Moses came back, to see what we were doing, would he recognize it? Would it be, and then would we arrest him for being a heretic? I don't know that we wouldn't. I'm not sure that we wouldn't.
But there are echoes in our own tradition, of course, of the themes of the book.
Yeah, so
what is the Midrash in which
we may have to dispose of the recording after this discussion, but I'm just, I felt that it was important. I felt that it was important to at least think about, to at least discuss, because we hope that religion should be something that helps us relate to things that enhance our lives, that provide for us, and the entire premise, it seemed to me, of the Inquisitor was that that's precisely what he's doing. And so he turns at the tables, and where it's precisely what we're doing. You are the one that's making everything a massive problem. Come on in. The opening argument that he makes, I think the opening premise that he makes has to do with freedom. So I thought maybe we would read that quote for a second. I mean, a lot of it has to do with freedom, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So.
Freedom is as against organized religion.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it seemed. So, if we go to that, for never was there anything more unbearable to the human race than personal freedom. He says to him. Yeah. So that becomes the premise. That becomes the premise for the entire thing. And what he's essentially, how do you hear that? You hear that, you read that, you hear that. And as a Jewish person, what does one think? I'm not looking for the right answer. I'm interested. That's the whole point of the discussion.
Would you encourage people to come and have organized religion here in synagogue? And then, but you also want them to have freedom of thought. So, you've got to marry the two together. You
want them to have freedom of thought, and that sounds like that, therefore, it would be mutually exclusive. Right? In other words, to be able, it's the premise, it seems. Possibly. Right? We're giving them religion because they hate freedom. Now, that's, it seems to be the basis of his entire argument.
Because they hate freedom or because they can't cope with freedom?
Well, can't cope with it. They can't cope with it, right? Yeah, he says it's unbearable. That's the word that he uses. It's unbearable to the human race. Yeah, and so you look at the way that we do things. Everything that we read, practically every place that we engage in religion, at least in terms of ours, is Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim. It's always the freedom of Egypt, freedom of Egypt. So what would he respond? It's the premise of pretty much everything that we do. It's, for some reason, we hold freedom to be, the foundation stone of the whole approach, and yet we're asking people to come in, to engage in an organized religious sense. Does one negate the other?
Yes, I think it does. It's freedom of choice to start with, but once you choose, you're bound.
But you have the freedom of choice initially.
Like the Catholics are bound.
Yes.
But that's you choosing.
Yes,
this is where what they're doing over here is imposing.
Choosing for them.
Right? We will impose. And what do they use in order to impose? In other words, there's one tactic that they dangle, right, or that they use in order to be able to maintain the power of that imposition. It's the bread.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Man cannot live on bread alone.
Well, that's what God says.
No, that's right.
I mean, that's what the Bible says. He would beg to differ. He would beg to differ. Okay, I mean,
it struck me that it was very much a Christian dichotomy between, there's Jesus representing the spiritual and everything that's otherworldly, and the Inquisitor representing everything that's of this world and earthy, and I suppose we don't have the same dichotomy because we regard our religion is very earthbound.
So you detected that when you were reading.
Yeah,
you felt that it was something that you weren't, as a Jewish person, relating.
No, I would exactly. I mean, I did relate to it when I was an adolescent when I read this.
I
read the Brothers Karamazov.
God bless you.
When I was 20.
God bless you. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's a significant point. It's a significant point that is it simply religion? I mean, look, it could be that any religion or approach to to religious life could fall into this. I'm not 100% sure that in some of its iterations or manifestations that modern Judaism doesn't somehow find itself in these problems. Perhaps not to the degree, because it doesn't have a long tradition of it. Perhaps it's not seeped into it. But I wonder. I mean, I recognize absolutely what you're saying, that we don't have this strange dichotomy of the spiritual.
We have the tension,
but we have
this
tension.
world and the other world. That we don't have the sort of strange distinction. It's like one or the other.
So I mean, it's funny because he's looking at Jesus as the freedom. Right? He's saying, you're trying to provide the freedom for the people, and I realize that it's unbearable for them. So we are using your terms and ideas, but putting them in as a slavery of sorts for the people, which they will thank us for. If they were to know, they would thank us for. And we provide them their bread. So, if we think about it, is Judaism, if we were able to look at it, I don't necessarily want to assert it this way because I'm the rabbi, and so it's I'm as we say in Hebrew, nogea badavar, right? I'm what's it in English? When you're
devil's advocate.
No.
Bound by my word.
When you're partial, right? You're impartial. So is it true that there's something different in the Jewish outlook? I don't think that Judaism is immune to it, but is there something in the Jewish outlook in where freedom is so much a major part of how our religion or how we approach our worship or service of God? It's so much of the foundation of what we do. You look at Pesach, everything is Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim, and even if you look at Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim, actually, I'm glad that we have a nice attendance. I only made 7 coffees, so I was being not as optimistic as but share,
But can you remind me, there's a midrash in which the rabbis disagree on something, and one of the rabbis has divine approval.
Yes, this is a midrash in the Talmud of Baba Metzia.
That's right, and they say that you have nothing to do with it. You've given us the Torah for us. Well, it's rather the same there. I mean, Jesus says you will be bound by Peter, by the church, in fact, and you. Inquisitor says you have nothing to do with it. Now go away. You've left it to us. Well, that
I'll burn you tomorrow.
That echoed with me.
Yeah. So
I was going to say, I think when I read the book, I was looking at the definition of freedom, which is the ability to believe in God, not believe in God, without coercion, without reassurance, complete freedom. There's no incentive to believe in God. You are completely free to believe or not believe. And then I remember the shir you gave in Hendon, one Motzei Shabbat, I think it was. And you said...
That makes one of us. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
So the difference between Western secular freedom and freedom in Judaism, which is
that was at dinner.
Instead of the secular freedom, which I think is this freedom. I don't think it is coming from Catholicism or Christianity. I think because Dostoyevsky is putting these words into the mouth of Ivan the atheist, and I think he's misrepresenting Catholic.
Very possible. But that's important to make that distinction. When we say freedom, what do we mean? Because I was going to wait to point it out, but it's an important point. At the end, does he not say we're going to provide them all of the sins? Right? He says we're going to let them do all the sins. So he's providing them some freedom, but is that freedom? In other words, when he says freedom here, what is he talking about? What is the unbearable aspect of freedom? Yeah. Is it not the fact that in true freedom we genuinely have the ability to choose what it is that we want to become? Not just what we want to do. I mean, he's opening to them whatever you want to do and still able to call them slaves. So there's a very insightful presentation over here and where he says anything more unbearable to the human race than personal freedom in terms of what it is that I can become in my life, what it is that I can achieve in my life, perhaps, not simply what it is that I wish to do in my life. That's open to them. We'll deal with that. We'll let them do whatever it is that comes to them that they wish to do in terms of meeting any drives, desires, whatever it is. That's child play. And he calls them children, which when I was reading that, it's I couldn't help but think they look at all of their flock as children, and it's an abuse of children. It's basically there's a tremendous approach to that. So I thought to look at this, in terms of the freedom. There is a concept that is traditional in Torah, that we have a tradition of, that it is unbearable for us, that the freedom is unbearable. And so the first line that I put down on these pages was this line from Shemot, where it says V'hamushim. It's in Bishalach. It's actually Parashat Bishalach, the very opening of Parashat Bishalach, and where it says V'hamushim alu b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. Now, the simple reading of that is that they came out armed. The word v'hamushim can mean they came out armed, but the word hamush comes from the root hamish, which means, of course, 5. And so the Hachamim have a tradition that they pass down that says that is to also express the idea that only 1/5 of the people left, that 4/5, 80% of the people, refused to leave. They would have nothing of this crazy freedom that Moses was trying to bring them to. Who knows what it'll lead to. And what they say is, we have an evil we know. Yes. And we prefer the evil we know to the one that we don't. So if you skip down, right, even those that leave and opt for the freedom can't really make it very well. So it's this famous story in where they get to the point where they've had it with this these frosted flakes that are falling from the sky, and Safsuf Asher B'Kirbo, it says this the mass of people that had come out with them, because there were some Egyptians and whatnot, hit avu ta'ava, which literally means they had a desire. Ta'ava is just a desire or a drive. Hit avu ta'ava, and it got the best of them. Vayashuvu. So this is all framed not in terms of I'm hungry. It's framed in terms of I desire. I want something. Which is why they're not complaining for bread but for meat over here. They want barbecue. Vayashuvu vayivku gam b'nei Israel. So even the children of Israel started crying over this whole thing. We can't have anything that we enjoy. We're not able to have all of the desires. Zacharnu et hadaga. This is their one fight against Moses. We remember the fish that we used to have. Asher nochal b'Mitzrayim, that we used to eat in Egypt, chinam, free of charge. Not like we're charging over here, but the cost is very high because it's freedom. It's the cost to have to eat, in the state that we're in, to have to. It was given to us. Sure, it was probably the scraps. It probably wasn't anything, worth writing home about. But it was given to us. It was provided. So, you hear about how, prison life, prisoners are treated very well. And there are even, documentaries done. How certain people prefer to be arrested and thrown in prison than the life that they have outside of prison. At least they're 3 square meals a day. They have a bed. They're able to be protected. Yeah. And they say, et kishuim, the courgettes, v'et avatihim, and the watermelons, v'et hatzir, v'et bitzalim, the onion, ashumim, the garlic. We had, we had food. So this is not just we're starving. This is, we didn't have to worry over there. It was a very simple, yes, of course there was no freedom. It's like, it reminds me of, I was walking home with in Brooklyn, I was walking home with a recent Syrian Jew who had come out maybe 7 years earlier. And I was saying to him, I said, what? It must have been very difficult there, the confines of living in that situation. He goes, Haki balash. He says, all nonsense. I said, what do you mean? He said, we could go wherever we wanted. We just couldn't leave. As an American, you're listening to this and saying, go wherever you want, anywhere in Syria, you were fine. But, outside of Syria was off limits. And, but that was fine with them. Now to be completely taken out of that context. Yeah. So, and then it says, our souls are dried up, they say. So this is a very serious argument. So serious, I would imagine, that very few people would reject what the Inquisitor is offering. Yeah.
The flesh pots of Egypt.
And when the
they said, Yashavnu al sir basar, the flesh pots of Egypt.
If you look at it from the point of view of the Inquisitor, could he not be challenging or afraid that Jesus would be challenging his power? Big state over little state.
Sure, of course. I mean, he says that.
Yeah.
That's why I say, I'll burn you. I'll burn you tomorrow. Don't think that I'm worried about this God business.
Yeah. So it's nothing, it could not be nothing to do with people having freedom or not having freedom. It's very much the power, the control that he wants to keep.
He exposes himself, yeah. I mean, he definitely, if you look at it perhaps on another level, right, on a perhaps, either deeper or a secondary level, he exposes himself later on. He says, would you come and take this power away, right? Would you come and take this away from me? How dare you come and take this away from me when we've already gotten everybody? And he goes, he flips back and forth to the good I'm doing for the people, but then it's mine. Yeah. Yeah. But
which is what you can look at governments around the world today. Are they doing things for the benefit of the population? Was it for their own power? It's exactly the same thing.
Yes, I think it is. I mean, 2 billion people in China might tell you something, but there's something, I feel, personally, that there's something particularly heinous about doing it in terms of religion. Personally, I feel. Because the whole, if you look at it genuinely, the entire approach of Torah is to be able to provide a freedom for human beings to be able to achieve a life. And you say, well, what's all this mitzvah business? It's kind of counterproductive to the whole freedom. If you're going to impose upon me 613 mitzvot and several hundred derivatives thereof, of each one of them, how on earth is that supposed to provide a freedom? As a matter of fact, one of the most telling passages in the Talmud, which I didn't put on the page, which I should have, is it says, and I'm sure you might have heard this before, it says that the experience of standing at Sinai was as though the mountain was being held over their heads. And God saying to them, accept it or I drop the mountain on your heads. Right? So the Maharal, he says, of Prague, he says it was, of course, not the mountain literally hovering over their heads. He says that the experience of the statements or the experience of the revelation was so powerful in terms of its truth that the people felt that the mountain, they might as well be standing under a mountain. I mean, there were not really any other options for them. The question is, does that negate the reality of a freedom? I mean, one needs choice, ultimately, in terms of doing it. But I again point back to the question of being able to provide sin as an option. If freedom is the ability to become what we wish to become, if it is, suggesting, if freedom is the ability to become what we wish to become, rather than do what we wish to do, it's an entirely different approach. So I can see the mitzvah initially as a freed slave, as an intrusion. But if I am free in a world to do what I wish or become what I wish, but I have no sense of the implications of my actions or the consequences of my actions, how free do I end up really becoming? I don't really have an ability to be able to achieve something in my life if I don't have guidelines that tell me, okay, this is what it is that will bring you into a state of success. These will be impediments for you in terms of the life that you live. So one can argue that the mitzvah, and this the Hachamim say, and you think they're just being rabbis when they say this, but what they say is, En lecha ben chorin, you don't have a free person, ela mi she'osek b'Torah, unless that person is engaging and toiling in Torah, which sounds like a very religious thing to say. But if one thinks about it from that perspective, right, that if I look at Torah as a framework for life, not meant simply to impose all types of constraints, but rather to provide a framework for action and a framework for life, I can see what it's speaking about. I always thought that that this, at least in the emancipation of slaves in America, what was lacking. Lincoln liberated the slaves, but he didn't really provide them any freedom, and the nation struggled with it all the way until yesterday practically. They're still struggling with slave mentalities. Because there was never a structure provided to integrate those slaves into society as free people. It was simply, we've opened your cage door. Have fun. Right? No one's going to necessarily stop you.
Then why is freedom within the constraints of Torah different from freedom within the constraints of the Catholic Church?
Well, that's a very good question.
Or is it different?
Well, I think that it very well could be. I would say it is, and I would probably draw from what Alan was saying to look at it, right? Because he's painting the church here. He's not necessarily. He's saying that the way that he's painting Dostoyevsky, he's saying Jesus is removed from the church. There's the church, and then there's Jesus, which essentially is lehavdil elef havdalot, to separate from us. Is essentially saying there's religion, and then there's God, right? And we should be, not that we have to separate the two, but we should be careful not to clump the two in being synonymous always. That's his approach of it, right? That's the way that he's taking it. Yeah. So I think that's an important distinction in terms of reading it. And then the question is, right, if that's the case, if that's what the religion is meant to be, is it accomplishing that? Is it accomplishing that? It's something that I think it's valuable to think about. I don't know that we have all the answers to it, but nonetheless something that's important to think about if it's meant to be. Very easily the innovations of yesterday become the institutions of today. Yeah, and they become very difficult. So they are no longer innovations. Yeah, and we enjoy them as being institutions rather than innovation. Once upon a time, there had to be an innovation. So, he writes over here, in terms of the experience, he says, there exists no greater or more painful anxiety for a man who has freed himself from all religious bias. There's a problem, right? What if we throw all religion out? Is that the answer? So he says, there exists no greater or more painful anxiety for a man who has freed himself from all religious bias than how he shall soonest find a new object or idea to worship. But man seeks to bow before that only which is recognized by the greater majority, if not by all his fellow men, as having a right to be worshipped, whose rights are so unquestionable that men agree unanimously to bow down to it. For the chief concern of these miserable creatures is not to find and worship the idol of their own choice. That's not even what they want. It's not even that, right? It's not even to worship the idol of their own choice, but to discover that which all others will believe in and consent to bow down to in a mass. Is what they call it. It's mass, right? It is that instinctive need of having a worship in common that is the chief suffering of every man, the chief concern of mankind from the beginning of times. I thought that was one of the most powerful lines in the book. It's very apropos to the Parashat HaShavua. But, what's he saying over here?
It's a doctrine of authority, isn't it? It's
saying that
humans need authority. And that's perhaps another area where there's a distinction between Judaism and Christianity, because we don't have the same idea that, you know,
True.
what your rabbi tells you you have to do. I mean, there might be another rabbi telling you to do something different.
That's right. There's always at least one. Right? You know, in Arabic, my father used to tell me that in Arabic, his father used to say, from a Jewish perspective, he said, "Nahne ma'ana al-sheikh," which means we don't have the sheikh said so. We don't do that. You know, so I think that definitely there is an issue of authority, but it seems to me that he's focusing here on the mass. He keeps coming back to that. It's not even that they want their own idol. They just want to know what everybody else is worshiping. You know, there's this mob mentality, the idea of the mass, of what it is, as being able to belong to something, to a group, to a tribe, which is immensely powerful psychologically for us. Immensely powerful. I mean, without even realizing it. You know, one of the greatest fears could be argued that a human being has is to be considered not belonging, right, or to be left out.
Would you sort of compare that at the time of the Holocaust?
How so? Say again, how so?
Belonging, the Holocaust. I mean,
from what end?
Well,
from the
belonging to the movement.
Mm-hmm. It was a major problem. It was one of the easiest ways to coerce, to coerce people in. Very easy to do. Yeah. It's only, all of a sudden you wake up. But is that not part of the strength of, it's part of the strength of so many things, that we experience as human beings. But it's definitely used in religion, is it not? The fear of excommunication. Terribly powerful. Terribly powerful. As a matter of fact, I won't go into it as we're recording, but it's a very serious tactic. And so he's saying that, we're using you. What will you create? What are you going to create? A bunch of individuals? You're going to create a bunch of unique identities that should be able to then somehow coalesce into some type of harmonious. What kind of crazy dreams? So I thought it was beautiful that we ended up. It wasn't planned, but that we ended up ending this right before Parashat Lech Lecha. Because, Avraham, at least traditionally, is looked at as the iconoclast extraordinaire. This is a man that he's called, the Chachamim say he's called in Ivri, which literally means, aside from Hebrew, as Lashon Ever, which means that he's on another side, where the whole world is on one side and this man's on the other side, where he's bucking the entire system. He is standing on his own. He's walking off on his own. The opening words of the parasha are, leave your father's house, what's familiar to you, your people, your family, walk off, walk on. He becomes this person, and the midrash that the Chachamim pull from the psukim is that the problem with Avraham was that it wasn't just that he was challenging their gods; it was that his crazy behavior was threatening the cohesion of society, which is what I spoke about in synagogue last week. Because the end of Noah, which is the Tower of Babel, has the entire society speaking one language, of one word. Everyone's doing the same thing. Build a tower, lest we scatter. That's where it ends. And from there we go to Lech Lecha, right? Where on the other side of this Nimrodian, who's the king, this Nimrodian subjugation sounds very much like the Inquisitor, who's saying, don't get in the way of my work. The people are happy. There's harmony. I'm doing what I need to do. We'll throw them in the furnace otherwise, which was the whole idea of the Kivshan Ha'esh, this burning furnace, which we have tradition of, which he almost, got at. Abraham, kind of by the skin of his teeth was able to escape. On the other hand, you have Abraham who's saying, but the diversity of creation. But look around. But the Creator. But the diversity. But you're going to stamp all of that out. Well, what will you do, Abraham, when they're lobbing missiles at us? When they've all... This is the dialogue. This is a fundamental opening of Torah. This is where it all kind of turns out. And it comes right back. It's brilliant of Dostoyevsky to bring this out this way in terms of the question of religion. What are we going to do? Are we really going to accept what God's doing here? And recognize that everything is so unique and different, and to be able to recognize that the fundamental, what the crazy Americans called inalienable rights, that people are inherently free. Yeah. So it seems to me that you look at religion. You look at religion even in terms of our own religion. There are aspects where fear kind of kicks in. fear, am I going to get my daily bread? Or will I not? Bowl of rice for every citizen, right? We will guarantee you that. How powerful is that? You know, Morris Biton was telling me. I heard it from him, so I say it in his name. He was giving me last year. He was giving me a small tour around the city, and he showed me this old soup kitchen, which was a Christian soup kitchen, and it was a terribly dangerous thing at the time, and it forced the community, the congregation, to open their own soup kitchen because they were converting people. Nobody had any food. So they were providing a soup kitchen, and in the soup kitchen converting people.
I mean, in the 30s?
Yeah. This was?
In the 30s.
No, I don't know if it was the 30s. I think it was earlier than that. But it was only, I mean, it was before, I think they built Lauderdale Road. So the whole community was there. And you think the threat that the rabbis had to deal with, or the community itself had to deal with, and where literally, because of the poverty, the church was capitalizing on the poverty, providing the soup and converting people. And he took me, and I wouldn't go into the church, but he showed me from the outside, because it was the outside vestibule, that it had a plaque on the outside. I forget which church it was. He would know, of course. That blessed the Jews that had come into the church. You don't realize, I mean, it's unthinkable today that this would be an epidemic problem, but it was an epidemic problem. And it was done by providing them their daily bread. How powerful that is, so you look at it today, and you look at you see a sea of black. I mean, I hate to say it, but I think we have to say it, and you say, well, okay, I mean, everybody's conforming. But is that written in the Torah? I mean, is that something written in the Talmud? It's clearly a behavior. It's clearly a behavior that's something that has been decided by whoever it's been decided in after the war. It really, picked up and took on. You look at pictures, even of old Europe. I mean, of the old communities in Europe. No, that wasn't going on. I mean, people wore suits. They had different colors. Yeah, there may have been other confines, and there's writings that we have about it. I mean, the Maharal again writes one of the most mind-boggling things in his commentary on the Pirkei Avot. And he says that when you see a young man walking into yeshiva, it's worth tearing your clothes. He says, right? I'm not saying that this is it's not my approach. I'm quoting what it is that he said, and only to put it into perspective. He says, Chai Hashem, by God, he says, Im lo ra'ui likroa al zeh. It says it's not worth tearing your clothes al sefer Torah nesraf, as you would watching a sefer Torah being burned in front of you. Why would he say this? This is a Maharal, right of Prague. He said because before he walks into the yeshiva, he has a mind that is open and thinking and bright. And then he gets into the yeshiva and they stamp out all possibility of him being able to think about anything intelligent. And this is 100 years practically before the war. So it's not like this is a new problem. Yeah, I mean, he clearly writes out this problem. He's very famous for writing this, and they say, yeah, that's a Maharal. They don't recognize it. But I think if we were to be honest, I don't want this to be a lecture. It's turning into a lecture. If we were to be honest, it is based on freedom. Our Torah is based on freedom. And the mitzvot are not meant to be, these intrusions. And so that the end of it is, all he does is kiss the Inquisitor. I just thought how brilliant it is. Kills him with this kiss, He can't bring himself to stop the program, but his heart is burning all the while. He's just destroyed. And I wonder, I wonder how much of that is going on. But so there's another thing that he says over here. He says, there are three powers. It's only him, right? There's no answers, right? He's just talking and talking. Meanwhile, every chance of success was offered thee. There are three powers, three unique forces upon earth, capable of conquering forever by charming the conscience of these weak rebels, men for their own good. And these forces are miracle, mystery, and authority. Right? But he opens miracle. Right? That I can say at least in its source, is fundamentally Christian. It's not a Jewish thing. The Jews never really used miracle in order to be able to bring people into faith. We do now a lot. We try to find scrape whatever we can to get people to. We use everything in the book. We pray on the superstitions. But first of all, let's talk about that. I mean, why is that? 3 powers: miracle, mystery, and authority. Why those things? I mean, what do they do?
You say that the Jewish tradition doesn't value miracle, but it does in its memory.
Mm-hmm. I'm saying doesn't value.
Of the miracle of the Exodus and the...
They're recalled.
Yeah.
But were they used to bring about faith? That's the question. Yeah. So we'll see in a second. But let's talk about this. I mean, he's making a very important point. Before we look at it from the Jewish perspective, which is the premise of the book club. But what's he saying, Dostoyevsky? He's saying it very strongly. Capital M, right? Miracle, mystery, and authority. I think about mystery. What does that do for us? How does that... I mean, isn't, every secret society...
Yes,
people love
at
secrets.
one point it says you're in competition with the Masons. Isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the Masons. Why not? I don't say anything. Right? We have some. Yeah, we have our own cohort, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, the Gates of Heaven Masons. But there's something about secrets, and the irony of secret society not being secret because otherwise nobody would know about them. But there's secrets in them. Yeah.
Mysteries give people like the Inquisitor and his rank authority. They know something the masses don't. And the masses look up to them because they know something that they don't.
Absolutely.
So there is that.
It's so true. That's I think of these conspiracy theories, within government. You talk about it with government. Who knows what's going on with the government? Who knows what they know? Who knows what they're keeping from us? Who knows what's happening? Yeah. All right. We better stay safe. They've got some things that we don't know. The funny thing is, again, as far as the Jewish perspective is concerned, this is what they say was the problem with Moses being late and coming down. The whole golden calf, the impetus for the entire golden calf is, where is he? What is he keeping from us? It says, Vayara'am ki boshesh Moshe. Boshesh means that there was something that he was keeping or limiting from them. The word bosh literally means embarrassment or shame, So the first time that we see it in Torah is with Adam and Eve. It says they were both naked. Veloit boshashu. They didn't have any sense of vulnerability, in terms of that. And so there's a need. When you do feel that, you have a need to cover up. Right? In other words, when you have busha, you have a need to cover up. Right? You're not going to expose yourself. Or we'll say even in terms of legal terms, don't expose, don't be exposed. Don't be vulnerable. So it says Vayaram ki boshesh Moshe laredet, right? That he was boshesh from coming down. It's not saying that he was delayed in coming down. It's saying that he was holding something back. He didn't want to expose something to them. He's not exposing something to us. What is it that it could be? All right, fine. We'll make our own idol. We'll have control of our God and whatever it is. We don't know what's going on. Yeah. So there's that. There's miracle, of course. You need 2 to become a saint in the Catholic Church.
2 miracles.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Card tricks don't count. You need to have real miracles. Yeah.
I think there's a comment on human nature throughout this piece too, that human nature is weak. And that is why he needs a miracle. He needs a sign from God that God exists.
Yes.
Otherwise he doesn't believe.
Yes. Fantastic. That part of the story was amazing, right? I need a sign. But in
the book it's rejected.
I'm sorry?
In the book it's rejected.
Rejected.
Jesus rejected.
Yes, you get very rejected. You crazy lunatic, you. Right.
Come down from the cross.
Yeah. Right.
They were all rejected.
Absolutely.
But he does plenty of other miracles in the book. He just doesn't do that one.
Well, this is presumably
Waking up that
Dostoyevsky's
little
ideal
right,
religion.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, we love our miracles, don't we?
We like our
We like to.
miracles.
What he actually says is, it's not even that they. I think he says over here, it's not even that they want to believe particularly in you. Later on, he says, where is it? Fantastic point.
And we have,
Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm going to say, and we also have our mysteries. I mean, Jewish mysticism. Kabbalah.
Oh.
You know, there is a great mystery, the rabbis write.
I think that's a fantastic point.
And you're not allowed to know what it is. They don't say.
And yet,
Ramban doesn't say. He said this is a great mystery. Some people know, and they have the power. Others don't.
But people are so drawn.
Yes.
Because, you know, I think about this.
Not drawn.
People love Kabbalah. They love it. I mean, not everyone, but
Until
many people are drawn to it.
Until they actually get into it.
Yeah, and then they don't know how to get out, you know.
Then it's a bit different.
But they love it because something explains the unexplained. And we prefer to have an explanation than none, even if it's fantastical, right? And I'm not saying, I mean, I think that, you know, there's great beauty in Kabbalah from its source. I think that it's terribly adulterated very often. But that, I mean, there's very much of that. Yeah. So if you can say, okay, I saw a miracle, there's something that I can believe in, there's something there that I can look to be able to, you know, to hang on to and hold on. Everything is there, especially if the basis of the entire edifice is belief. In other words, if the entire religion is based on belief, then why wouldn't miracles be the lifeblood of a religion? In other words, if the whole thing is not only belief, but to the degree to which you will believe things that test the extent of what it is that you can believe in, right? You know, how far will you go in your belief is the greater saint, right? Is the greater individual, which is very much not a traditional Jewish way of looking at things. First of all, there is no such thing as belief in Torah. It doesn't use the word in Torah. It uses the word emunah, but emunah is not belief. Emunah, everywhere it's used in Torah and in Nevi'im, in the Tanakh, means to be faithful. So for example, I'll give you examples. We say every single day, Modeh ani lefanecha, melech chai v'kayam, she'achezarta bin meshati b'chemla, rabba emunatecha. Yeah? We're talking to God. God doesn't have to believe. He's God, right? If believing is where I don't know. And yet we talk about his emunah. But what are we saying? In which context are we talking? We're saying every day, you bring back my soul, renew the world. Your emunah is great. Talking about your faithfulness. You faithfully return my soul every day. Or it says in the Talmud, after 120 years, a person will be asked several questions. First question that a person will be asked is, Nasata v'natata be'emunah. Did you deal in your life? Did your dealings, were they done in emunah? Which doesn't mean did you do them with faith. It means did you do them faithfully? In your business, were you faithful? That's the word. So Torah doesn't speak about faith in that word. When it talks about God, it talks about knowledge. V'yada'ata hayom v'ashivota lelevarecha. You shall know today, the word da'at, know today. Bring it back to your heart. Ki Adonai hu Elohim, yod ke vav ke is God, en od, no others. Or as King David says to Solomon before he dies, Da et Elohei avicha ve'ovdehu. Know the God of your father, serve him. Or as King Solomon writes in Proverbs, says, Bechol derachecha da'ehu, in all of your ways know him. Right? It always talks about knowledge. It's all knowledge. That's why Rambam, when he talks about it, he says there's an obligation to know. So are we talking about knowing through proof? No, we're not talking about knowing through. We're talking about knowing through experience. The way one knows love, the way one knows beauty, the way one, right? That's what we're talking about. So
Knowing because of miracle.
I'm sorry?
Not knowing because
of miracle.
I'm not so sure.
Well, this is one thing that I did put on the pages, so we'll look at it in a second. Yeah.
You're talking about faith, and it's interesting. I mean, I've read theology, so I've looked a little bit at Christian faith. And faith as Christians define it as believing in what you cannot see.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Lord Sachs one time, quite a while ago, I remember him saying something about the difference between Christianity and Judaism. He was at some function, he said, and he said he was asked, and there were non-Jews, they're Christians, and he was asked to make a blessing. So he looked around and he said, I need to have some food in front of me. And so he took the food and he made the right blessing, and he ate some food. I think it was fruit. And he said this shows the difference between Christianity and Judaism. Christians, when they sit down to make the blessing on food, they sit down to an empty table, and they make the blessing. Lord, make us truly thankful for the food you're about to eat, and there's nothing on the table, and then the food comes. And he says, we Jews were different. We actually have to have the food.
We better see it. That's fantastic. Very good. Very good. So let's take a look at the Rambam. Yeah, and he talks about this issue of miracles, and he says, he opens it up. He writes this in the Yesodei HaTorah, which literally means the foundations of the Torah. You know, these are the fundamental ideas. And he says, Moshe Rabbeinu lo he'eminu bo Yisrael mipnei ha'otot she'asa. Says that Yisrael, the children of Israel, were not faithful to Moses because of the otot that he did, the signs that he made. Shehama'amin al pi ha'otot, because a person who is faithful to anything, because of these signs, or because of signs that are done, yesh belibo dofi, there's something wrong with his heart. His heart is crooked, right? There's something not straight in his heart. Shefshar sheyeh hasod belat bekishuf. I mean, there's many ways to get things to happen. Things could happen all in any number of ways, but it's not necessarily an indication of a reality. All that he did in the desert were logistics. It says, what were the miracles? They were logistical. Yeah, lefisha tzorech asan. He did with what he needed. Lo levi re'aya ala nevuah. None of it was done in order to prove prophecy. Yeah, I need to get you across the ocean. Okay, we'll split it. It's better than creating a whole bunch of rafts out of thin air. We'll use That's why I always say in the Red Sea, in the whole splitting of the Red Sea, the pasuk goes out of its way to say that there was a wind, very strong wind all night. Why does it have to tell me that? Just say split the sea. It's even the pasuk attempts to be able to show that there was something brewing. During the entire time. But the point of the Rambam is that God's not peeking through reality and manipulating reality in order to be able to get things to happen. Right? He was very strong on that. That was very much his God flows through it, and things run in terms of that. Right? And so he was very strong about the fact that miracles could be defined or could be looked at in natural terms, but they are not there in order to be able to incur faith. Yeah, faithfulness is because you experience, because you have a relationship, because but not simply to be able to do magic tricks in order to be able to get you to be excited about them and then connect. Right, so that's very much, this is, he puts forth in terms of the fundamentals, but it's known, right? But we use them anyway. We have this epidemic in New York that I could never really deal with. I mean, I never really was able to, remove it. So right after Pesach, and this is started from the Ashkenazim, actually. It wasn't something I was into, but the whole community, the Syrian community, hook, line, and sinker for this thing. After Pesach, they bake a key into their first challah of the first Shabbat after Pesach. They bake a key into it. And this is in order to, they believe that if you do this, it helps your financial success. Yeah. No corollaries have ever been made to but yet, what do you lose? You got it. And they used to say this to me, say, what do you lose, Rabbi?
They're very superstitious.
They're very superstitious. Yeah. But they said to me, so I said, what do you lose? Or they used to say, there was a whole thing, Pesach. And they argued with me and said, what do you lose? And I said, you lose a very precious thing. You use rational thought. Because all it takes is a little crack, and very easily it falls away. if this is all right, I mean, this is plausible. Okay, so then all rational thought can be thrown out. If I could throw it out here, why can't I throw it out in different places? And that is such an important thing, right? Especially for our freedom. Because if we're going to determine choices, if we're genuinely going to take them under consideration, genuinely be able to anticipate consequences and how it is that our lives are ultimately going to be able to develop based on what it is that we do, sure. Anytime that we make a choice, we collapse every other option, right? In other words, once we choose, you're right, we collapse every, and that's not open, and that becomes very difficult for us, to have to collapse options. This is why we have such anxiety over making choices. Why we would prefer to be able to have things already given and defined. Yeah, we like givens in our most primal sense. Yeah, which is we remember the flesh pots. We'll take those rather than. But the idea of being able to think, to contemplate, to be able to think for oneself, so to speak, that he says is the most unbearable aspect of humanity. He's not wrong. He's not wrong. But nonetheless, it's what Torah has always encouraged us to do. In its truest sense, it's what it's encouraged us to do. And when we have aspects, I'll go so far as to say masquerading under the guise of Torah, prompting us not to do that, yeah, then we have real problems. We have issues. Yeah.
Isn't there a basic mystery behind all religion, which is not rational? It's a miracle, or what you will.
Yeah.
There must be.
Yeah.
Mustn't there?
Well, this is what I was trying to get Mark to answer last night.
Whether you could stick to that and then become rational, as Rambam is, or not. But if you lose that, I think you've lost something very important.
Yeah, I would agree.
But it's in the nature of a religious sensibility to be aware of a paradox, to be aware of the fact that God has revealed himself, but he's hidden. And at times he seems more hidden, and at times he seems more manifest.
Absolutely.
But the paradox is there. It's always there.
Yeah.
That's what I was saying. I was trying to get him to engage in that, to talk about it, because he writes so beautifully about it. And he did say that there's a tension between the two. But what he points out, and I think that other people point out in different ways, is that there's a triumph of reason in the world today, and where that's all we need. On the other side of the coin, reason is extremely important, because without it, we end up really removing ourselves from reality. But at the same time, reason is not equipped to be able to bring to us all aspects of reality. I mean, there are other aspects of reality that we sense, that we experience, more than just on a belief basis, that impact us from the outside, that we nonetheless can say that we know. And there is a tension, and I think that there are certainly paradoxes that we experience, but even rational thinkers would not negate paradox. In other words, they wouldn't say that because there is paradox that therefore it doesn't exist. Yeah. So I agree. I think that that's a very important point. But there's a different issue when we then remove all capacity to be able to entertain reality in any reasonable sense. And that's, I think, what it is that he's, that he's arguing over here. Yeah, and I think that to end, because we're coming close to the end of time, the kiss. All he needs to do is kiss him at the end. Yeah, it's shocking. All the words and the whole diatribe and the entire dialectic, which is happening on a one-way thing. All one needs is one direct experience of that. And how is he supposed to tell that to someone? Right? I mean, how is he supposed to now go describe, the experience, or even to be able to share it with somebody? What's happening internally as a result? I mean, you read it; it's worth it.
And what happened immediately afterwards is that Alyosha kisses Ivan, and Ivan says, to him, "You've stolen my life. You've taken out of my story."
Yeah. And you together with him. Yeah, but how beautiful an ending to the.
But in a way, that is a kind of affirmation of the Jesus side of the equation, if you like, and it's quite powerful because there's certain things that you can't say, but you have to show, and that, I mean, the silence speaks volumes, and the kiss speaks volumes, and it almost overwhelms anything that the Inquisitor could have said.
What one kiss could do. Yeah, it's amazing. It's astonishing. It's brilliant end.
In the Christian story in the Gospels, Jesus is betrayed by a kiss. when he's I can't remember, he's in the garden,
Judas,
and the soldiers come to arrest Jesus. And Judas, he goes up to say, the man I kiss will be the one that you need. So he goes up to kiss Jesus, and then he's arrested.
Do you think that's significant?
So it's an act.
Jesus gets up and he kisses the Inquisitor. It's kind of, is it irony?
It could very well be. Very interesting. Very interesting. But there, I mean, in that story, it's where an act of love is being used, to manipulate.
But is it well written? Is it well presented? The argument of
here, you mean in terms of
there, or is it what we're all putting into it?
Well, I mean, I think that it's being put out, to be able to be analyzed and looked at. And again, the premise of the meeting and of the club is to be able to look at these things from a Torah perspective, from a Jewish perspective. So I try and offer, what the perspective might be on it and what it is that he's trying to say. Yeah. But I don't think it could mean anything. I do think that there are meanings. I'm not a postmodernist in that sense. Yeah. All right. Did you enjoy the reading? Did you enjoy it? Yeah. All right. I'm glad. So our next book is The Art of Loving, on that note. Yeah. By Eric Fromm. F-R-O-M-M. Yeah. I don't have the date of the next meeting in front of me, but it will be sent out.